It's interesting how the ideas that circle around in your mind for books and novels sometimes then reflect in the world outside. So for about a few years ago, I came up with an idea for a novel. I was probably going to use it for a Max Cameron novel involving a certain politician of the sort of far left in Spain. And he was modeled, this character was going to be modeled on a real politician of the left in Spain called Pablo Iglesias, who's the leader of the Podemos party. Because I noticed that every time that Pablo Iglesias, and who's quite an interesting character, he's quite slight man, and he's got a goatee beard and a ponytail. He's not your usual politician-looking figure, and he sort of emerged out of the Occupy movement that kicked off in Spain several years ago. But you notice every time he sort of got into a position of power, or his party got into a position of power, he himself would do something that would somehow undermine it, and they would end up losing power. So, for example, they were in control of the Madrid region, his party was, or parties associated with him, and then he sort of undermined it and they lost power. So I started to come up with this idea that maybe Pablo Iglesias, or my novelized version of him, in this potential book that I was going to write, was actually sort of a mole working for the far right, or certainly for the right wing, and that he was there planted by kind of right-wing conservative forces to basically undermine the left, even though he was pretending to represent them. It was sort of a fantasy, the idea of sort of conspiracy theory fantasy that I was going to turn into a novel. And then when Podemos joined the government, which they did, and they've been with the socialist government for over a year now, I thought, oh, okay, well, obviously this idea doesn't work, because this time Pablo Iglesias, the real Pablo Iglesias, is actually in power, and rather than walking away from it and undermining his own party, he has actually joined this coalition government with the socialists. And so my theory doesn't really hold up. It wouldn't work. This idea for a book wouldn't work. That is until today, because today Pablo Iglesias, rather unexpectedly, has given up his position as deputy prime minister in this coalition government and decided that he is going to stand in new elections for the Madrid community, the sort of the region of Madrid. It's come as a bit of a surprise to everybody. If you're not interested in Spanish politics, then it probably won't mean very much. But if you are interested in Spanish politics, it is quite a surprise. And somehow it seems to reflect this idea that I've had for quite a while, which I'd shelved, that this guy actually is... in my conspiracy theory version of him, is actually working for the conservative right, and he's there to undermine the left. Anyway, we shall see. Will I bring this idea back to life? Maybe I should, because, as I say, there's this sort of curious link sometimes between the sort of fictional ideas that float around in a writer's mind and the real world outside.